Have you ever listened to a solo before and felt oddly unsatisfied? The notes could all be technically correct. The technique could be perfect and flawless. The player might have an extremely talented ability to weave between high-pitched notes, low-pitched notes, really fast notes, and add in some nice harmonic complexity. However, when all is said and done, you're kind of left there thinking, meh. For some reason, the solo didn't really speak to you that much. It didn't really grab your ear. The reason these solos kind of sound unsatisfying and boring to listen to is because they're missing the element of the story. So what can we do to improve our storytelling ability with our solos on the instrument? Seeing as music is quite similar to a language, seeing as we can write it, we can learn how to speak it, and if you're nerdy enough on the guitar, you can actually learn how to read sheet music as well. We can actually draw a lot of parallels between traditional storytelling techniques that authors use and turn them into some practical exercises to improve our ability to tell stories whilst soloing. But first, before we get into any exercises, I want you to imagine you are reading a book that was just one continuous sentence for 200 pages long. I think we can all agree that it would be a terrible experience reading a book that didn't separate its sentences into paragraphs, and then separate those paragraphs into chapters, and then separate those chapters into an interesting beginning, middle, and end. The thing is, as guitarists, we're guilty of doing the exact same thing with our phrasing. We learn a scale to attempt to solo, and then when we actually try and solo, all we do is just play continuously up and down a scale, and never really realize when we're supposed to pause and end these phrases, right? So what can we do to break out of the monotony and improve our ability to play more interesting phrasing? One thing that's helped me out quite a bit was imagining my phrases are supposed to have a beginning, middle, and end. So here's a kind of like a formula and an exercise that we can practice. First, we need to pick a chord that we're going to solo over the top of, and then figure out what scale we're going to play over the top of that chord. So for today, we're just going to pick A minor, and we know that we can play the A minor pentatonic over the top of that. So what we're going to do, again, we're going to think of a beginning, middle, and end. The beginning of our phrases are going to start on any chord tone. If you know how to play your triad shapes all the way across the neck, this isn't going to be too difficult for you. Again, I'll show some diagrams on the screen as well at the moment if you're not familiar where the triads fit inside of your scale shape. But we have this kind of triad over here, root, minor third, fifth, that's inside this pentatonic box shape. So for our beginning, we're going to play on any chord tone, right? So let's just, for simplicity's sake, just play on this root note of A over here. And then for the middle of our phrase, we're just going to play anything inside the scale shape. And then for the ending of the phrase, we're going to finalize by landing on another note inside of your triad shape. So let's put this into context, right? Let's play beginning, middle, end. Let's give another example. Beginning, middle, end. This is going to keep your phrases more grounded, and it's going to stop you kind of just endlessly losing control and never really figuring out how to end your phrases. You're going to realize you actually have a lot of freedom to play around with the scale when you use this framework. You're going to find yourself going and playing without going off the rails and losing track as much because you're grounded to these chord tones. You know that you have to start and end there. It's a nice little exercise to make your playing sound more concise. But what happens when you try to play with a beginning, middle, and end in mind? However, you find yourself only really playing the same phrases over and over and over again. Well, to understand how to fix this, I think we should actually take a look, weirdly, at the advice from the South Park creators and see what they use to make their stories more interesting.
Each individual scene has to work as a kind of funny sketch. You don't want one scene that's just like, well, what was the point of that scene? We've found out this really simple rule that maybe you guys have all heard before, but it took us a long time to learn it. But we can take these beats, which are basically the beats of your outline, and if the words "and then" belong between those beats, you're f***ed, basically. You got something pretty boring. What should happen between every beat that you've written down is either the word "therefore" or "but." Right? So what I'm saying is that you come up with an idea and it's like, okay, this happens, right? And then this happens. No. It should be this happens and therefore this happens. But this happens, therefore this happens.
I think that was some really interesting advice from Matt and Trey. Essentially, what they're talking about there is whenever you introduce a new idea into your story, you need to make sure that it has some consequence upon the ideas that have come before it or come after it. So what can we do to stop playing and then type of phrases and start playing some more but or therefore type of phrases in our playing? So what we're going to do to improve this, we're going to try an exercise that I learned from Michael League of Snarky Puppy. Now, you don't really have to like Snarky Puppy's music. Again, I'm not really the biggest fan. I think they have some really talented musicians in their band, but you're going to get a lot of value out of this exercise by practicing it. You don't have to like their music. Essentially, we're going to start off with the same kind of idea from earlier. We pick a chord, and then we find the scale that we can play over the top of it. For variety's sake, I'm going to play the A Dorian scale this time, right? So we're going to do the same thing as earlier, where we start with a beginning and middle in mind, right? Beginning, just start on a chord tone. Middle, just play it around the scale. Where this gets interesting, and where this helps us link our phrases together, is the fret that we end every phrase on is also going to become the starting point of the next phrase that we play. So let's say I play something like this. So I ended here. Now I'm going to start my phrase from this fret as well. So I ended here, and now I'm going to start the next phrase from here. Again, end from here and start from here for the next phrase. So this keeps your phrases kind of grounded and connected all together. Let's give this a try over my little loop and see what we can play in context. So I end here, let's start here as well. Start and end on this point. Start and end here. Again, start and end here. I think this exercise really helps us create a link between every phrase and stops us from playing like disjointed type of ideas. Like we're all kind of guilty sometimes of like just running up and down a scale and then playing a new idea from some different place in the scale, and they're just completely disconnected from each other and they just sound disjointed. They don't really work together. So this exercise kind of helps us link ideas together by using the idea of like but and therefore, and gets rid of those kind of like and then type of phrases. When we only ever play and then type of phrases, we don't really have much room to create interesting tension and release in our solos. The key to a satisfying story is actually also a dance between tension and release. If a character doesn't go through any kind of interesting conflict and then resolve this conflict, the story is going to be quite boring to follow along with. The exact same premise is true for music. However, I think there is a bit of a misconception around what tension actually means in music. We all have this kind of understanding that by using like the wrong notes or like chromatic notes, that kind of adds in some tension. And like maybe you understand that like using diminished kind of runs adds in some tension as well. But it's not only harmony that we can use for tension. Your use of rhythm is also going to have a massive impact on your tension as well. And that actually might be easier for you to start implementing into your playing. I think the best way to understand how we can take advantage of rhythm is actually to listen to this short piece from the author Gary Provost. This sentence has 5 words. Here are 5 more words. 5-word sentences are fine, but several together become monotonous. Listen to what is happening. The writing is getting boring. The sound of it drones. It's like a stuck record. The ear demands some variety. Now listen. I vary the sentence length and I create music. Music. The writing sings. It has a pleasant rhythm, a lilt, a harmony. I use short sentences, and I use sentences of medium length. And sometimes when I am certain the reader is rested, I will engage him with a sentence of considerable length, a sentence that burns with energy and builds with all the impetus of a crescendo, the roll of the drums, the crash of the cymbals, sounds that say listen to this, it is important. So I write with a combination of short, medium, and long sentences. Create a sound that pleases the reader's ear. Don't just write words, write music. So what we can learn from that is that tension and release is a balance between the expected and the unexpected. Now, when we play continuous rhythms, we actually set up an expectation for the listener. I think this probably explains why many of us don't really feel much when we hear the average type of shredder try to rip a face-melting solo. It doesn't really matter if your rhythm is really fast or really slow. If it's continuous and unchanging, it's going to become quite monotonous to the listener. We're going to expect to hear the exact same thing over and over and over again. So just like how Gary encourages his writers to write with a combination of short, medium, and long sentences, I think as guitarists, when we're soloing, we should also think about improvising with a variety of short, medium, and long phrases. Again, when we do this, this interrupts the expectation of the listener. If the listener doesn't really know what to expect, they're going to be listening on the edge of their seat. So how can we modify our phrasing to create that perfect balance between tension and release with the rhythms we choose to play? I think the answer lies in the different subdivisions that we play and the ability to play offbeat syncopated notes. So throwing in some triplets, some quintuplets, or septuplets is a brilliant way to throw off the listener's expectations. However, if you're not someone like Frank Zappa or Steve Vai, it's actually going to be quite difficult to play those quintuplets and septuplets. So for the moment, I'd encourage everyone to just focus on triplets and those offbeat syncopated notes. So to practice this, we're just going to play a short phrase that starts and ends from the same point. Think of it kind of like a little motif. So let's put on this backing track again. So I'm just going to come up with like a short phrase. Something like that, right? There's not really much kind of complicated rhythm going on. Let's give that another go. Just something short and simple. And then we're just going to slowly add in like another word. You could think of it like that. We're just going to add in one more note to that phrase. The exact same phrase again, right? And let's add in one more note. And just slowly keep adding. And now we can start thinking about playing like some offbeat syncopation, or maybe even adding in some triplets as well, around this kind of short phrase. Let's try some syncopation. Again, when you add in those kind of those different subdivisions and add in the offbeat syncopation, you really throw the expectation of the listener off. So try mixing and matching between the two of those. Play just the simple kind of expected rhythm and then offbeat. Again. It really throws off the expectation of the listener. You kind of set them up to think it's kind of like safe and kind of boring with just like simple rhythms, and then you kind of throw everything off by playing in between those beats. So keep this going for a bit. Just start slow and simple, and then kind of just gradually expand it note by note. And then after a while, you're going to find yourself in a kind of flow where you can dip and duck between kind of short rhythms, and then instantly go into some like really fast, complex sounding phrases. The thing is, if you want to level up these storytelling techniques even further and get to the point where you can start improvising with them, you don't want to miss out on this video that I've also made on improvisation over here as well. You can also join my free school community to get access to all the diagrams shown in today's video, and you also get access to ask me any questions about the guitar as well.